And yeah, we'll get this started. So really excited about this opportunity to submit abstracts for IAC 2025. It's an exciting event, and I'll hand over to Jess, who will talk a little bit more about IAC 25, just as a background. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Lisa. Hello, everybody. So good to have you guys online. So New South Wales Government, honestly, we're genuinely thrilled to be co-hosting IAC 25 alongside SIA and the Australian Space Agency. And we've actually been working, I think, for a couple of years now, maybe even 3 or 4. I think it was 2021 that we've started this journey, and we've been working with SIA and ASA to bring IAC back to Australia. And this commitment stems from you. So it's the recognition of you guys, the incredible talent, the innovation, and the achievements within our space sector. So Australia has hosted IAC twice before, the 49th IAC in Melbourne in 1998 and the 68th IAC in Adelaide in 2017. We're hosting IAC a 3rd time in Sydney this year, and that in itself is actually rare, and it's an opportunity that we shouldn't take lightly. It's a chance to showcase to the world, but actually also to our fellow Australians, the rapid progress that you guys and the sector has made, and also the fundamental role that space plays in Australia's way of life. So a few differentiators about our IAC that I want to impart. IAC 25 is obviously about showcasing and advancing space in Australia, but also our region. It's only the 8th time in the 76-year history that an IAC has been hosted in the Indo-Asia Pacific. So that makes it an opportunity to bring all the global space community to our region and to Australia. And we already know countries like India, Japan, and Korea, they're all already very eager and engaged in our IAC. It's also about broadening the influence and relevance of space to adjacent industries. We want to bring in the mining community. We want to bring in adjacent industries in the energy, telecommunications, and emergency services to our IAC. Our IAC theme is Sustainable Space, Resilient Earth. It's about highlighting sustainable space-based applications for Earth, sustainable space activities on Earth, and sustaining life off Earth. And lastly, we want to be ambitious. We want to activate the City of Sydney. We want to engage the public in Sydney, in New South Wales, but also across Australia, and demonstrate why space is critical for both businesses and also our everyday lives. I'll wrap up with the fact that New South Wales Government will have a major presence at IAC 25, and we're here to support you guys to attend, to participate where we can. Whether you guys are showcasing your technology, submitting an abstract, have ideas on how we can bring space to life in the heart of Sydney, we want to hear those ideas and we want to help elevate your achievements. So do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. I'll leave it there, keep it nice and short, hand over to you, Dom.
Thanks, Jess. G'day, everybody. My name's Dominic Shamillan. I work at the Australian Space Agency, and we're incredibly excited here at the Australian Space Agency to be co-hosting this IAC alongside our amazing space community here in Australia and, of course, New South Wales Government, SIA and the IAF. This is a monumental showcase for the Australian space sector and for the space in the region to showcase our capabilities and inspire the next generation of space professionals and startups and technologies that are going to really take us that next great leap forward. As you all know, the IAC is the global event for the space community. The IAC in Milan was the largest gathering of space professionals ever, and we're hoping that Sydney will be even bigger and more amazing to make sure that we can really showcase the great work that is part of the IAF and the IAC. This year's IAC in Sydney is particularly special. It's a gateway to the Indo-Pacific region, which is one of the most rapidly growing space regions on the planet. And we'll get to explore the growing space markets and some of the professionals and international partnerships that are growing ever so more important in that region. We've also got another colleague of mine, Kerry Doherty, online today, who might be joining and speaking a bit later. Kerry is probably holding the record for the Australian who has attended the most IACs ever. Kerry, I think we need to figure out whether that's actually legit, and we'll get you in the Guinness World Book of Records if that's something we can do. But Kerry is an excellent resource for all things space and IAC, particularly space here in Australia. But look, lastly, we're really excited to be talking to you today about submitting abstracts and being part of this big event, and learning more and teaching more about how you can be involved and contribute to what I think will be a very, very special IAC. We'll be doing some question and answers at the end. So when we get to that point, we'll direct you how to do that. There's a Q&A feature in this chat, and you can also pop your questions in the chat. But without further ado, I'll pass to our IPC co-chair, Annie Hanmer.
Thanks, Dom. And thanks, everyone. It's so nice to be chatting to you about IAC. I think it was an awesome introduction. So what I'm going to do is take you through a little bit more granular information about the academic sessions at IAC, so the papers that you can present, as well as the special sessions. And then I'm going to show you where to find more information and kind of lead you through how to find the right session to submit to, little tips and tricks for how to do that. And then once we've done that, I will pass to the wonderful Kerry Doherty for some tips on how to get your abstract selected. So what I'm going to do is share my screen. And here we go. I'm going to start with a little presentation here. See if this works for me. There we go. Okay, Lisa, can you nod if you can see that? Excellent. All right, so what is IAC? Most of you here probably know, but for those who don't, as has been said, it's a massive event. It's the world's premier space event. It brings together bright minds, innovators, and leaders in the global space community. IAC is organised by the International Astronautical Federation, and Sydney is the host for this event for 2025. It's a platform, particularly from the academic standpoint, for knowledge exchange and collaboration. And I think that's important as I get into talking more about the technical sessions, for just to kind of have that in mind. There are lots of ways to engage with IAC, and the technical sessions that we're going to talk about today and the special sessions are just one way that you can do that. IAC has been running for over 70 years, and it is a really fascinating event for that reason. You get a lot of diversity, and for those of you joining from Australia, for example, compared to our Australian conferences, you can expect a lot of international attention, engagement, and that can be very attractive for people when they're looking at trying to improve their research. So categories is where we'll go next. IAC has 5 main categories that technical sessions are broken down into. The reason I mention this is because there's often a misconception when people talk to me that if they're not a scientist working on physics or astronomy, that there's no place for them in the technical sessions at IAC. And I'm going to bust that myth for you and talk you through these. So item number A, or letter A, is science and exploration. And this is about everything to do with sustaining missions in space. So life, microgravity, space exploration, space debris, and a search for extraterrestrial intelligence. It's a fascinating session. Within each of these categories, you'll find different, more specific technical sessions that are more related to your particular research, but this category encompasses all of those things. Category B is applications and operations. This is to do with your kind of what you might call the BAU of space, so business as usual. So Earth observation, communication, navigation, human space flight and human space activities, and small satellites. So this applies to activities that are ongoing, but also things that might come up in the future. Category C is technology. This is if you want to get even more nerdy into your systems, your subsystems, your physics, astrodynamics, structures, power, propulsion, rocket flight, that kind of stuff would fall into technology. D is infrastructure. So this is systems sustaining space missions. So space system transportation, again, your rocket flight from an actual, now my rocket is going somewhere perspective, rather than a this is how the engine works perspective. Future systems and safety. And then the final category is space and society. And this is everything to do with the interaction of space with society. So education, policy, economics, history, and law. You've also got space security and sustainability, space arts, planetary defense. You've got in-space design, you've got AI, emerging space ecosystems. This is where you capture everything that's a little bit out of the box, I would say, and a great place to look if you're not sure that what you're doing fits into A, B, C, or D. You're likely to find somewhere that it fits in E. Okay, so if I can move the slide across, here we go. These are your basic dates for submissions, and I'm going to go through in a second and show you more detail, but I'll just whiz through this quickly. 28th of February is when your abstracts are due. Your paper, if you're selected, you actually have to write a paper. Depending on your session, they have a different word length, but it's usually around about 5,000 words. And that is due on the 12th of September. And then if you get selected for an interactive presentation, and I will describe in more detail what that means in a minute, then you also have to submit your presentation, and that's due on the 20th of September. So I pull this out only because there are some conferences, especially academic conferences, and I've been to these, where you get selected with your abstract and you sort of write your presentation on the plane and you get there and off you go. For IAC, you do need to submit an actual paper, and then the paper is published after IAC in the proceedings of the conference. So you want to make sure it's good because people can go and find it afterwards. Okay, if you want to scan the QR, you can. Otherwise, I will. I'm sure this will be sent out afterwards. Special sessions. If you're not sure that you're cut out for an academic presentation, or you just want something a little bit different, special sessions are a forum for focused discussions on new technical and multidisciplinary topics, and provide, in particular, opportunities for audience engagement. And I call that out especially because if you're doing a technical presentation, you're standing up in front of people for about 10 minutes, talking to slides and taking a couple of questions from the floor at the end. With a special session, you have a longer period of time where you can work with your audience. So it could be in the form of a workshop, a campfire structure. You could do some sprints on a topic. You could get everyone together and try to, build little satellites out of paper or something like that, and use that to demonstrate something. It's a very creative format, and it is well suited if you are an organization. I'm just thinking, some sort of organization that has something in particular you want to share with a wider group, and it's something that does lend itself to an interactive format. So less useful if you're presenting the results of your study that you've conducted into something to do with astrobiology, but more useful if you are looking to discuss policy, have a workshop on something like, I'm just trying to think of an example, but, polar medicine or something like that, where you actually want people to bring examples and work together. Special sessions are very competitive. There are lots of submissions and very few slots. They have to be multidisciplinary. It has to be cutting edge in terms of the topic area, and they have to fit into one of those symposium topics. So those 5 I laid out before. You have to identify which one it fits into, because when we assess them against each topic. So do keep that in mind when you're putting in your application. Fill in all the required aspects on your application form. Don't leave it blank. Otherwise, it will be very quickly kind of taken out of the running because there are so many submissions that come through. So that's a quick summary of that one. Your deadline for submission for these is earlier, 7th of February. So keep in mind that's the case. So I'm going to now get out of this particular window and move to a different one to take you through a bit more information. And as we go, please, if you've got questions, start thinking of them because we'll do Q&A at the end as well. Okay, I'm going to start on this particular page. This will come out in the links after the session. It's a guide to how to engage in IAC. So IAC, as we've said, is coming up. It's a 5-day Congress. And as you can see from this map of the program, it is a big event. There is a lot going on. So what we're talking about today in this session is just the technical sessions, which are these grey boxes. and the special sessions, which are the blue boxes running alongside those grey boxes. We also talk a little about the IP sessions, which are these pink ones. So you can see there's a lot more going on in the conference. And the reason I say that is because IAC is very competitive, and your abstracts are selected, and Kerry will talk about this, by a group of experts in the field, and sometimes even very good abstracts don't get selected. So do keep in mind there's a lot more going on at this conference, and even if you're not selected for a session, you should really consider coming along, because you can attend sessions and get involved in all of the other aspects. So with that being said, I'm going to talk about the technical program, and the reason I'm using this is because then you can go back and look at it yourself. But here's your information on the technical program. So you'll see the technical sessions, which I mentioned before, technical sessions and interactive presentations. I will come to that, and the special sessions. They are open to everyone, which is why they're a really great place to get involved if you want to be involved in the program. To apply, the link is here to fill in your submission form. You do have to apply, and it is a competitive process. These selections, so the International Program Committee, the IPC, selects the abstracts, and that's that group of experts I was referring to. And then the steering group, the IPC steering group here, selects the special sessions, and that's the group that I chair. Their deadlines to apply 28th of Feb and 7th of Feb, like I said. Now, there's more information you can find in this little handy, what would we call this, pack, I guess, which will be useful for you to have a look at. So for the technical sessions and interactive presentations, I think now's the moment to talk about it. I've teased it enough. So a technical session is what you might consider to be an oral presentation that you might have done at an academic conference before. You speak for 10 to 20 minutes. You stand in front of a group of people who are seated in a room, you have slides, and you present your research, and you have questions at the end. Now, an interactive presentation is a different format, and it's a little bit like a poster session, but it's, as the name says, more interactive. So the IAF actually has a particular software that you use to have a presentation that people can click through. It is something that's on a screen and people can look at throughout the conference. And you also get to give a presentation. So you have a 10-minute slot where you stand in front of your presentation and people gather around in a sort of open forum. You present your research, they can ask questions. It is a great way of sparking discussion. I always say, when people say which one is better, I would say it depends. Probably if you're an introvert, an oral presentation is better because you stand in front of people, but they don't tend to talk back. An interactive presentation is very suitable for extroverts. It's also great if you are a student or someone looking for feedback on your research, because where an oral presentation, you kind of just present your stuff and you might get one or two questions. For an interactive presentation, you can actually have a conversation with the people present, and the people who come to that session are going to be really interested in what you have to say, versus for a oral presentation where they might be waiting to listen to the talk after yours, and that's kind of why they're there. So keep it in mind. There is, always a perception, and sometimes it's linked to funding, that oral presentations are better. Some universities say that unless it's an oral presentation, they won't fund you. If you're at a university, do check that. When you submit your abstract, you can select that you want to be considered for oral presentation, interactive presentation, or both. I always suggest you put down both, because if you're not able to be selected for an oral presentation, an interactive presentation is a really good option, and vice versa. So keep it in mind. Selection is done on the basis of the applicability, the scientific merit, and of course, compliance with what's required. Kerry will go through that, so I will leave that to her. But what I will do is take you through what the call for abstracts looks like and get a bit more into the topics. So this is your call for abstracts. It's a massive document, 68 pages, and you can see there's a lot of information in here with messages from various people, including our very own local organising committee in Sydney, myself, and various other people from the IAF. I actually do recommend you read through all of this because it does give you a very good overview of the conference, especially if you've never been before. Okay, as we go down here, get You see there's a lot in it. We get to the technical sessions, page 21, if you want to skip there yourself. You'll see these categories that we talked about before, A, B, C, and D, and colours are down each side. And if you already know that you are someone who does space law, you can skip to category E, because you're probably not going to find your session anywhere else. But if you're doing something kind of sciencey or something to do with engineering, to do with space, it's worth reading through all of the different sessions that could be applicable to you so that you make sure that you haven't missed something. That's because instead of, in IAC, instead of just applying with your abstract and then they say, wow, that sounds like cool research, the way it works is you submit to a particular session, and then the people who are selecting for that session, so that committee, select for that session. So if you apply to the wrong session, even if you have the best abstract ever written, it won't be selected. So if I take an abstract that I've written on space law or maybe space history, and I submit it to human physiology in space, it will just not get selected because it's not relevant to human physiology in space. So do be really careful and take note of the code that you need to apply to, especially if you haven't done this before. But what are you going to do with 40 pages of content that you've got to read through? My suggestion is obviously read the whole thing, because that's the best way to know what's going on. But if you want a shorthand, you can use your Control F. And I just searched up before because I saw someone in the chat was doing astrobiology, that you can search your keyword. So I've searched biolog, just in case it says biological, and you can skip through, and here we go. Session A 1.6 is about advancements in astrobiology and space exploration. So if you read the description, you can see whether that applies to your research. You'll also see there's another one which is just about biology in space. And that applies to anything that's related to gravity in ground based and spaceflight experiments, as well as on topics not covered by other sessions of this symposium. So it might be that if you're, for example, working in our very own Australian Plants for Space research group, A1.6 might not really apply for astrobiology that you're doing, in the sense of what if I grow a plant in space? It may be more about, what if there was a plant that was growing on Mars already? So if that's the case when you read this, then A1.8 would be a more appropriate thing to apply for. And the rule is apply to the most specific, most related, most relevant session for your research. You can, and I'll answer this question now because I know it'll come up. If you're someone working in this group and you wanted to submit to both sessions, you can, but they have to be different abstracts. You can't submit a duplicate abstract. So you could say, I'm going to talk about what I think is going to be on Europa in terms of life in space in this session, and I'm going to write a separate abstract about I've been trying to grow a plant in microgravity at the bottom of a pool or something. I don't know. You could do that in session 1.8. So that you are welcome to apply to multiple, but they have to be different abstracts and substantially different abstracts. So I hope that helps. I saw someone from the Tasmanian Antarctic group had joined, and I was just having a look to see if there was anything to do with polar stuff, but I did see that there was a session. Let me see if I can find it now. Now my computer's being slow. One moment. Yes, there is a session on medicine in space and extreme environments. So even if you're working in something really niche, don't assume there's nothing relevant. For that person, there might be people in your department who are doing work on Antarctic medicine, and this session would love to hear from you, I'm sure, in terms of it can be physiological or psychological research in extreme environments, and that's relevant to space flight. So it might take a little bit of creativity to think about how is the research I'm doing able to be spun in to this space conference, but never underestimate that what you're doing is of interest to people. And often people who work in a field as specific as space medicine all know each other. They'll be so excited to have something fresh come in. and some different perspectives. So for whoever it was from the Antarctic Division or the department that covers Antarctica, do look into that. I think that probably is all I wanted to say. It's just, search through, find the keywords. You'll see there's so many sessions, and they're all really, really interesting. So do keep this in mind. And so that you make sure you don't miss anything, make sure you have a good look. Okay. Now we get through to FAQs on abstract submission. I'm going to hand over to Kerry in a moment, but I do want to call out that this this PDF document exists. We will send out the link, and it answers a lot of the common questions that people have. So for example, can I include a graph, table, or image in my abstract? The answer is no. There's also guidance about the use of AI. If you forget anything I've said, most of it is covered here somewhere. So you can have a look at this. And if you've got questions at the end, I'll do my best to answer them and then also direct you to this document. But I just wanted to flag it because it is a very, very helpful guide. I'm going to pause there and hand over to Kerry. And Kerry, if you wanted to give some tips on, your best tips for how to get selected, I'm sure everyone would love to hear it.
Okay, I'll actually start with my best tip for newcomers is to actually read that guide that Annie has just pointed you to, because we will get thousands of abstracts that will be submitted to all the different sessions. And frankly, when you're doing, when you're reading through dozens and dozens of abstracts for a particular session, you want to be able to cover them quickly, although giving them, good attention. But you want something which is fitting within the pattern that you've asked for the abstract, so that you don't have to be then, thinking about an abstract that comes in an unusual form. Do pay very careful attention, please, to your grammar and your spelling, and writing something which is nice and succinct and coherent. Because if we get something, now I will say we do make very due allowance to the fact that English is not everyone's first language. But at the same time, if we get something that's so poorly written, we can't actually be sure about what it is you're talking about in your abstract, it will very quickly be put aside, because we have so many abstracts to go through. We don't have time literally to deal with abstracts that are not fulfilling the requirements of the submission. Another thing that Annie has already pointed out, which is again really important, is to go through that list of the various sessions and try as much as as much as you can, if you've perhaps got an unusual topic, to find a session which is as close as possible to what it is you want to talk about. Now, if you submit to the wrong session, that is a session which is, you've put in an abstract which is not actually particularly relevant there, it may be that you may not be completely put aside straight away. It may be that the assessors can see that there is a relevance to another session that you may not have thought about. And so they may recommend, and we can do this, we can recommend that a paper is transferred to another session. However, if it goes to another session, it will be put at the bottom of the consideration list, and so you still may not get an opportunity to get into that other session. Also, very good advice about ticking both the oral presentation and the IP presentation, because it's often the case that we get more great papers or great abstracts than we can accommodate in a session, and we will actually try to move those to an interactive session if we possibly can. So, but if you've ruled that out, you may not have that opportunity. So really do think about that. I'll actually say, don't be shy, don't be concerned about presenting to an audience. By and large, you will have an audience of people who are there to hear what you have to say. That's whether you're giving an interactive presentation or whether you are speaking in an oral session. Yeah, we're not sitting, people are not sitting there waiting to sit in judgment on you and pick holes in whatever you present. People are interested to hear what you have to say. And especially if you're a first comer, we take that into account. Excuse me. And in fact, I know Annie has mentioned it, and again, I will reiterate it. If your paper is not selected, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was a bad abstract. It just means that other abstracts that were selected in this case were perhaps more relevant, approach topics that haven't been covered before, and perhaps yours is covering ground that's similar to some other papers we've seen previously. So it doesn't actually mean that it was a bad abstract. And certainly you may want to consider submitting it again to a future paper. Depending on the session, some session chairs will actually take the time to write back and tell you why your abstract was not selected. If they do that, please, again, understand that's not to tell you that it was a bad abstract. It's to help guide you for future abstract submission. So, don't be put off. If you aren't selected this time, consider coming back to a future IAC. But on the other hand, do remember that if you are selected, you are expected to put in a paper and you are expected to appear to present it. And if you have a legitimate issue that comes up after your paper's been selected and you aren't able to attend, do write to the session chairs and let them know. Because if you just simply don't turn up, you will get a reputation as being a non-appearer. And then if you submit in the future, you may not be selected because this person's put in 3 abstracts and they've never turned up to any of them. So the odds are they won't turn up again. That's the way it'll be viewed. In terms of the abstract itself, as I said, keep it succinct. Don't include anything which is excluded in the instructions for the abstract writing. And I would note that the instructions tend to vary a little bit from year to year. So even if you perhaps submitted an abstract before, don't ignore having a read over the current set of instructions. I will note the IAF abstract submission system is rather clunky and can be a bit irritating. But if you submit an abstract actually and you're not sure if it's gone through, you can check with the IAF Secretariat. You can also send an email to the session chairs who are listed in the call for abstracts, and they can check whether or not that abstract has been received into their session. Let me just see, what else was I going to say? There's something else that flitted into my head for a moment. Abstract selection takes place in March, and that's normally occurring, officially it occurs over a period of about 2 days. It actually occurs over anything up to a week or so by the time, if we have a large number of abstracts, we're reading through all of them and giving them time to, to assess them and consider which ones will finally be selected. This means that you won't hear immediately in March. It takes a little bit of time then for all the accepted abstracts to be noted into the system, and you will usually around about late April or May, you will actually receive a letter telling you whether or not your abstract has been selected. If you haven't heard by the end of May, the odds are that you haven't been selected, and you will eventually receive an email that says that you were not selected. But again, if you've not heard by the end of May and you're wondering what's going on, you can always email the session chair for a bit of information. What else was I going to say? The interactive presentations, they are conducted separately in a separate area from the oral presentations. So it's a little bit of a different experience. But particularly if you've got research which is not fully completed yet. Ideally for oral presentations, we do like discussions of projects that are well on their way and that do have, some outcomes attached to them. That doesn't mean that if you've got something which is in progress, which is already getting some good results, or that you think has a lot of interest at this interim stage, you can certainly put forward an abstract about that. But if you've got something that's perhaps relatively new, where you're still gathering data that may be of interest to people in a particular subject area, perhaps look specifically at an interactive presentation, because you have a very short presentation period or window. In fact, that is something I will point out too. We do try to maximise the number of papers we can get into each session. And so you will find that the actual time allocated to you to present could be anywhere between 10 and 25 minutes, depending on how many papers have been selected in that session. Mostly, though, you'll find it's around the 15-minute mark. However long the time allocation is, though, you are expected to put in a completed paper. The IAF has a very strict no paper, no podium policy. That means that if your full paper and your full presentation have not been received by the appointed deadlines, then even if you turn up, you will not be permitted to present. You'll be able to come along and listen to the other papers, but particularly if you have a very strict chair of that session, you will not be permitted to present. Excuse me. You can, if you present, rephrase that. You've got your paper in, everything like that. You've presented. During your presentations, you'll be assessed for potential publication. So the proceedings of the IAC are published afterwards for all the papers that were submitted, but papers that are considered particularly good will be published in Acta Astronautica. So they're sort of being peer reviewed on the run during the sessions, and we will normally recommend 3 or 4 papers from each session for consideration for Acta Astronautica, which is the journal of the International Academy of Astronautics, and then they will go to further peer review. But it does give you the opportunity to have your paper published in one of the premier astronautical journals. How are we going for time there? Because you know me, I could rabbit on for quite some time about different things relating to presenting papers.
Kerry, we're doing pretty good. Maybe we'll wrap it up in 5 minutes so we can have some time for some Q&A.
Okay. Well, look, actually, why don't we go to the Q&A? Because very often things come up and then I can come back and respond to them. I think that's a better idea. Let's go to the Q&A, and then we can come back with specific answers to specific questions that people have. Perfect.
Well, everyone who's been mulling over a question that hasn't yet been answered in the chat, or they're hoping to get some more information about anything, please feel free to chuck a response in the Q&A function, and we'll jump to them immediately as they start coming in.
Yeah, as Annie has noted again, that each committee tends to have its own approach to that question of oral presentation or IP presentation. Some committees put more weight on selecting for the oral presentations and perhaps consider the IP presentations as not of the same level. They should not say not of the same quality, but they just consider the oral presentations perhaps more professionally important, if I can put it that way.
Kerry and Annie, we've got one question that's just come in from George Dyke.
Yeah.
George has asked, do you need to be an academic to be accepted for a session?
No, George. I know, George. No, George, you don't. You can come from any background whatsoever. I mean, you're coming from a commercial background, if I recall, and that's perfectly fine as long as you have submitted an abstract which people think is good enough to be selected, and you put your paper in and everything. There is no reason for you not to be selected just because you're coming from a non-academic background. Half the people who speak at the IAC are coming from industry.
Exactly right. Oh, sorry, Lisa.
Go, Annie. I was just going to throw in another question there, but go for it, Annie.
I was just going to say, if you are coming from industry, you can absolutely feel free to submit an abstract, and you should. But the only thing I'd say is do make sure that it does have some element of research or something novel that you're presenting. So it can't just be an advertisement for your company. It does need to say something relevant to the session.
Yeah, absolutely. You will find that if your abstract sounds like it's an ad for your company, you will not be selected. Also, check too, some sessions have sort of defining parameters that they're not asking in that session for presentations or research that comes outside certain parameters. In the history sessions, for example, we don't accept papers on anything more recent than 25 years. Whatever you're writing about must be 25 years old, 25 years or older, and that's so that we have papers that have a good perspective on the real historical importance of the particular topic, whereas something that may be flavour of the month more recently isn't necessarily going to have a long-term or may not be, its long-term value and importance may not be fully appreciated at this time. So, and particularly to the education sessions some of them have very strict parameters around the kinds of papers that they're calling for.
I've been caught out by that one before with that specific history session. The history I was writing my abstract about began 25 years ago, but my abstract went up to something that was about 15 years ago, and it obviously was not selected. So they are quite strict, which is as they have the right to be. Sorry, Lisa.
I'm sorry. Yes, go on, Lisa.
I was just going to ask the approval rate for abstracts, because I think the statistics on that is actually quite helpful for people. I don't know if you mentioned that before, Annie, but it might be quite reassuring to everyone applying.
It depends on the session. I think that the most each session, obviously some of them have more applicants, others have fewer applicants. In general, I think that a lot of sessions will only accept somewhere around 10% at most of what's submitted. So, but you can do the basic maths. Last year in Milan, I think there were 7,000 abstracts submitted and about 3,000 accepted. So that gives you a very clear idea already that your acceptance rate is sort of less than 40% overall. But in one particular session, I remember there was a rejection rate of something like 97%. And for the special sessions in particular, depending on how many submissions there are, again, that rejection rate can be very high. So certainly, exactly as Kerry said, you could have a great abstract, but you've got to remember this is an internationally competitive conference to present at, and sometimes it's just not your lucky year.
Yeah, I suppose you could actually say that percentage of rejection is partly dependent on how many papers are actually being submitted. And the IAF actually, a couple of years ago, we went through a stage where a lot of sessions were almost selecting every abstract just to fill a session, and then the IAF got sort of cracked down a bit on because quality was dropping in some sessions. And so there is very much an emphasis on quality in selection. With a lot of sessions, you'll get so many submissions, you will still fill every slot with great papers. And in fact, I've been on selection committees where we've actually reduced the time for submission for each paper as much as you possibly can, because we've just had so many great papers submitted. so that there's no hard and fast sort of percentage of rejection.
It's a good problem to have when you
Rejection
have a high number of high quality papers coming in from around the world. And some very interesting presentations last year and the years before on all of those various topics. We might jump to the next question, just given the time. I've got a double question from Claire Fletcher here. So question one: to be absolutely certain, we must write a paper if we get selected to present either a technical or interactive presentation. And then just to follow on from that, when you're actually writing that paper, how should those submitting abstracts and papers approach writing their abstracts if the research is certain to be complete by the time of the paper's presentations, but they're still getting data at the time of the abstract submission?
I might tackle it first, Kerry, and then you can come through with anything I've missed. So answer to question one is yes. Answer to question two is actually in that Q&A sheet that I shared before with the frequently asked questions, FAQ sheet that we shared before, and we'll send the link out, they do talk about this. If you already have some indicative results, then you can submit an abstract if you're sure that you are going to get the full results by the time you're at IAC. And you should submit it on the basis of, these are my indicative results. This is the study I'm doing. This is what it's going to show. And at this conference, I will present those results. However, if you're just starting your program and you don't have any results, then it's not really appropriate to submit an abstract for this conference, because the point of IAC is to share recent developments and recent research. So you should wait for next year to submit that research. Or there's something called late breaking news, where if you do have some amazing results come through, like you found, life on Venus, between, after the abstract's closed and IAC, there is another submission. It happens around June, I think, and it's for late breaking news, and you can submit an abstract then, and it might be selected if it's like really exciting stuff. So I think in your case, for the person asking that question, I think you'd be fine to submit an abstract based on what you said. But Kerry, did you have any alternative perspective on that?
No, I think that's pretty good. If you've got indicative results and in fact you're on the way, if in fact you're close to the end of your research but you haven't quite got everything completed yet and don't think you will have by the time of the Congress, but if you've got substantial results that you can talk about that are showing good data, good information, particularly if it's something that is quite new and potentially something that hasn't been covered before, it's worth, I think, submitting an abstract on that basis. The committee itself will decide ultimately whether they think it's too premature. But I think if you're a fair way along, but perhaps not quite completed, I do think it's worth submitting an abstract.
Excellent. Thanks, Kerry and Annie. We'll jump to the next question. This individual applied for the IAF Abstract Mentorship Program last week and was just curious how selective this is and what sort of timing that they can expect to hear back.
That's an interesting question, because I have just heard that I have been selected as a mentor and told that I will hear in due course about a mentee. I believe, actually, I can't remember an exact date, and you might recall it off the top of your head, Annie, but I think that obviously the idea is you're supposed to help your mentee prepare their abstract, so it would be within the next few weeks, because you have to have time to prepare your abstract. If you have applied for that program and you already have an abstract in mind, I would say start drafting that abstract, because the first thing you can then do is show it to your mentor, and that gives them something to start working with you. In fact, you might find you've actually written the perfect abstract already, but it's worth having a think initially, getting some thoughts, getting some drafts of your abstract text down before you actually chat with your mentor. This is my first time being a mentor too, so it's a new experience for me as well.
What you're saying, Kerry, is someone on this call might be your mentee We might
might
find
be.
that out at some point.
They might be. They may. I mean, it could be somebody from the other side of the world, because usually what they will do, of course, is that they'll match the potential areas of the mentee applicants with the areas of expertise of the mentors. So it'll be interesting. I noticed something here actually about space and society. What's that? Potential for new space laws. There are policy and law topics within Section E. You might also want to check. There are legal topics that come up in some of the other sections as well. I think in some of the commercial sessions. So as Annie was saying earlier, you might even want to put in a little bit of a search. A couple of search terms, but I would also suggest going through in detail all of the session offerings to see which will fit the best.
I just
Actually,
did that myself for
sorry.
law, and it came up with 70 results, 70. So exactly as Kerry says, but I would suggest go through all of them, especially if you want to talk about the potential for new space laws. They'd have to be specific to something to find the right session. So go through and read through all of those options.
On a slightly different tact here, we've got a question regarding who is evaluating the plenary program submissions.
I can answer that because it's partially me. The plenary program submissions are assessed by the IPC steering committee, and I'm the co-chair of that committee with the co-chair from Turkey. It's a group of representatives from each of those categories, if you like, and the chairs of the session, and we will look at all of the plenary submissions and then select based on what comes through. The process is quite rigorous. It's everyone rates everything independently, and then we come together to select, and that's how they're selected. So still selected by a committee, and it's still selected through a process, but that process is again through the IAF structures, not so much through the IAC Sydney group of people. So just to kind of be clear about that, if you want it selected, then it needs to come through that submission process.
I guess I should actually point out too that the committees that are doing the selection of the technical session papers are composed of members of the committees of the IAF, the IAA, that's the International Academy of Astronautics, and the International Academy of Space Law, or the International Institute of Space Law. So each of those academic expertise bodies have a number of committees covering all these different scientific, technical, and space and society areas. And it's people from those committees who, and I do say we volunteer our own time to do this, who assess all of those abstracts and make the selection of the papers. And in fact, if you're coming along to the IAC and you would like to get involved in the committees and move further into involvement with the various academies, certainly make that interest known. All the committees have meetings during the IAC, and you can request to come along as an observer and be part of those. And that way in the future, you might be a session chair and have the fun of getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to meet with your colleagues in Paris and discuss the selection of abstracts.
Dom, we've got 2 questions in the main chat as well from Venkat, if we have time for them.
Thanks, Lisa. Let's go to the most recent one from Venkat. They wanted to know how much of a focus is there on the feasibility of an idea as opposed to the originality and relevance by the selection committee.
I think maybe what that question is getting at is if you've got a crazy idea, or I won't put the judgment on it, but something that's a bit unusual, and you're worried that the committee consensus might disagree with your idea, will they not select it on that basis? And my experience is that's not the case. The committees do like to create discourse and disagreement and debate within the sessions. I was in a space law session in Milan last year where someone got so upset they kind of stood up and, started complaining about what was being said. And that's part of the whole thing. That's the exchange of ideas. That's what these conferences are all about. So I think if you present something with absolutely no data to back it up, and it's just, I've got a hunch that this asteroid might have diamonds on it, then I could imagine that the committee wouldn't find that very compelling. But if you present your data and your reasons and you set out a good argument, then then whether or not the person who's selecting those abstracts happens to agree with you or not won't come into their assessment. Kerry, would you agree?
Look, absolutely. I was going to say I was at an IAC once where we actually had the speaker and a member of the audience almost physically come to blows over an opinion about a certain historic matter. So yes, you can present something as long as in your abstract particularly you make it clear that you have data or whatever that verifies or supports in some way your particular viewpoint, your idea. Then certainly the committees will be interested in looking at it. I'd also add too that it would be very rare that one person's opinion contra whatever it is you're presenting would sway the committee group not to select it, because you actually have several people who are all assessing the same group of abstracts, and so you wind up you get a consensus opinion on the actual selection of the papers. So if you did have a single person who was vehemently opposed to it, but everybody else thought this is an interesting idea, we'd really like to hear it, it would go forward.
Thanks, Kerry and Annie. We've just hit the time there. Lisa, do you want to conclude us out?
Can we just answer the very quick question, if we have time, about the next gen plenary from Venkat? Is that okay?
Yes, of
just
course.
Just for 1 minute, if
Yep.
we can stay on an extra minute or two.
It's an action round. Let me just locate that one for you right now. Okay, so Venkat's also asked, can you please explain to me about the next gen plenary? I see that all plenaries are by the IPC steering group. So they wanted to ask about the procedures and other recommendations.
I think I can probably tackle this one pretty quickly. So the next gen plenary is a proposal that's run by a group of young people within the IAF, the Space Generation Advisory Council. That plenary focuses on the perspectives of younger members of the space community, which is defined as under 35. Which, whether or not you think that's true, that's what the definition is. So for that one, that selection for that plenary is not done by the topic selection is done by the IPC, but the selection of speakers is handled separately, and that's why that application has come out. So this group here has no kind of insight into how they do that selection, but I do recommend applying if you feel like you are able to do so and eligible for that opportunity.